Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines. And in this programme tonight we'll be discussing how Hamas leaders are making billions out of their conflict with Israel while their own people are in abject poverty in Gaza. We'll also be discussing how Qatar has been hosting these Hamas leaders while they're living in luxury, and 3 Hamas leaders alone are worth an estimate region of between $3 and $5 billion each. So we're saying, is this conflict really about territory, or is it about Hamas enriching themselves? So we will be exposing Hamas in this program and also suggesting what the West should do in response to the aid and the money given by the Islamist terrorist organisation Hamas, in which they are enriching themselves with billions. Alistair, it's great to have you on the programme. Just share with us a little bit about your thoughts about these recent news stories that have come out and revealed that Hamas are making billions out of their conflict with Israel, while their own people are in absolute abject poverty.
Well, I'm so glad these things are being exposed, because they need to. It's almost like a panorama program where you have to expose what's really happening, because so many people want to believe what they want to believe about the whole situation in Gaza. And it's tragic to see the abject poverty of the people, and then to hear these stories which are being exposed, and being exposed by one of the national newspapers as well, of the riches, the billions of riches that are being made by certain leaders of the organization. Well, you know, we've even seen from the film we've seen recently, the infrastructure in Gaza is terrible. There's hardly any hospital. The education system is lacking. There is no clean water, and everyone points the finger at Israel for this, but actually the problem is not that they haven't been receiving enough funds, they're just not using it for the benefit of the people. And I think, you know, we've all known this, those of us who follow the situation in the Middle East, but generally governments of the world need to wake up and see the money that they've poured into supposedly helping the people of Gaza has not been used for that purpose.
No, absolutely. So according to a recent news story in the Daily Mail, 3 of Hamas's most prominent senior leaders, they are Mousa Abu Marzouk and Khaled Mashal and Ismail, have a net worth of more than $3 billion each. The Israeli embassy in the US claims that the Islamist terrorist organization's annual turnover is $1 billion US, and they are the second wealthiest terrorist organization in the world, the first being ISIS. We see that Hamas leaders are living in absolute luxury in Qatar and also in Turkey, whilst profiteering from terrorism, and they are condemning their own citizens to misery and oppression, and Hamas is manipulating its residents in order to perpetuate the conflict with Israel to align their filthy pockets. And obviously we'll be discussing how the world needs to wake up to this reality that by actually funding and giving huge amounts of money in aid and donation to Gaza, this is then being used to align their own pockets. Not only are they built up a terror state in Gaza, as we've seen, Alistair, but they're also using their finances to enrich themselves at the expense of their own people. We saw the same thing happen with Yasser Arafat. I think also Mahmoud Abbas, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, have amassed billions by creaming off international aid money and taking it for themselves.
It's always been a concern of mine, and you know, I work in the EU as well with another organisation sometimes, and the questions I always ask when I meet up with people who are amongst the decision makers is, why is there no accountability for the amount of money that is being poured in to help people who need help? And why is it not accounted? You know, and the finances, as we can see from this expose that's just coming through, the money's not being used for the purpose it's sent to them, and is actually lining the pockets of people in the highest places, and they are the ones who are the runners of the Hamas, the violence, the terrorism that is going on, and they are receiving funds also from Iran too, so for what they're doing. So it really is time for the nations to if you're aiding people, of course we want to aid those who need aid, but let's make sure the finances are going to help with education, help with their water systems, help with things that are going to benefit the poor people, the people of the nation. But there's no accountability going on up to now. And I think maybe government leaders are beginning to wake up to the fact that the education system that they think they're funding is actually educating hatred towards Israel and the Jewish people, and not actually bringing in an education that can become productivity for the nation. So it needs a big turnaround.
I remember visiting Israel back in 2014, Alistair, just 1 month after Operation Cast Lead, when this was the last time that the Israelis launched a ground incursion into Gaza to stop Hamas's rockets and missiles being fired at Israel. And then my friends were saying, Israeli friends were saying afterwards, look, why don't the people of Gaza make a Malaysia of a Singapore of the Middle East? And I mean, they have the finest beaches there. You could create some of the finest restaurants and the finest hotels, because literally they have the finest beaches in the entire Mediterranean. But instead of actually benefiting the people, instead of raising the poverty levels of the people themselves by giving them jobs, and instead they've effectively turned Gaza into a terror state controlled by Islamic dictatorship under the most extreme Sharia law, and you can only really describe Gaza in comparison to that of the Taliban in Afghanistan, in which the people are living in absolute poverty whilst their own leaders cream off all the money for themselves. And the Daily Mail published an excellent article this week. It's entitled "The Hamas Terrorist Billionaires Who Live in Marble-Floored Mansions and Luxury Hotels as They Decry a Gaza Poverty After Profiteering from Misery and Terror." They said estimates suggest some of Hamas leaders have a net worth in the billions. Israel and other critics accuse the group, which is a terrorist organization, of spending money on luxuries instead of helping the people of Gaza. Conditions in the Gaza Strip have long been dire, with the territory referred to by some as the world's largest open prison. And it's so easy to blame Israel from that, but we've got to blame Hamas for this. Even before the outbreak of the war, in the wake of the October 7 terror attack on Israel, half of the Palestinians living in Gaza depend on food supplied by the United Nations. These conditions have deteriorated over the last month as Israel continues its bombardment of the 140 square mile strip in its mission to destroy Hamas, the Islamist terrorist organization. We're saying that his lavish holdings contrast sharply with the endemic poverty of the Gaza Strip, where some of the population, some half of the population is actually unemployed, and per capita GDP is around $5,600 annually, and in 2021 making it one of the poorest places in the world. So you have to ask yourself, I mean, this is a big question and stuff as well. I mean, we see that Hamas use extreme religious rhetoric, and they're linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. This is why they're having support from Qatar. This is why they're also being supported by the president of Turkey, President Erdogan, because he's a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. And so therefore they're talking about this violent rhetoric of genocide to destroy the nation of Israel. It's in their 1987 Covenant Charter, the destruction of Israel and the Jewish people around the world. But it seems as if this is a kind of big pretext in order to cream for themselves billions of pounds and enrich themselves at the expense of their own people.
Well, this is definitely what is coming through finally. I think most of us knew this was going on anyway, but you talked about earlier that the potential of that land, if they'd actually invested the money wisely, they could have been a small Dubai, with tourist trade coming in. If you're at peace with your neighbors, people are going to come there and use the holiday facilities. Even thinking of northern Cyprus, which is separate from the southern area, they have invested into getting in the holiday trade, and that would be productive. It would give jobs to the people. It would give them a hope for the future, because just like Dubai has absolutely blossomed because it's looked beyond its oil revenue into the future. the money has been enough to do that, and these billionaires or triple billionaires would have still lived a very good life, but they, as you've just said it, they haven't really cared about the people who are supposedly under them. You know, they have authority over them, and they're looking more to selfish gain. And then, of course, what we've seen during this conflict with Israel is they've spent millions and billions on the tunnels, 500 kilometers of tunnels under this strip of land, the weapons, the missiles, the rockets. I mean, I was looking even yesterday, there were more rockets coming out of Gaza, despite the fact that the Israel troops are surrounding Gaza City and so on, and yet Ashkelon was hit again this week and so on. So it's just so wrong that they haven't really thought about how can we educate our people and help our people to prosper. I mean, that's what it's all about.
No, absolutely. And also, I think they like to hide by their chance that Gaza is occupied.
Yeah.
The Israelis are occupying Gaza. Well, until October the 7th, Israel pulled out its Jewish communities of the Gaza Strip back in 2005, known as the disengagement plan, pulled out 8,000 Jewish settlers, together with 21 Jewish communities in the north of Gaza. Now looking back, almost 20 years later, you realize that was a huge strategic mistake on Israel's part, but also the fact that you can't say that Gaza is occupied when it's run by Hamas. Exactly. Yes, it's under siege, and the reason it's under siege is because it's a terrorist entity that is running the Gaza Strip. So just imagine if Gaza was, for example, in Europe, or it was next to England, and you had one of the world's most deadliest terrorist organizations on your doorstep that would fire rockets and missiles into your own country. How would you respond? So the fact is that Hamas, under its leadership, poses an existential threat to Israel. Is it any wonder that Israel has to do all it can to protect its citizens from this Islamist terrorist organization? And the fact is that it's Hamas that is responsible for the mess in Gaza. Hamas is responsible for governing the Gaza Strip. And according to the Daily Mail, the territory's 2.3 million people suffer. Several hundred millionaires are registered in the coastal strip. The Gazan economy is heavily dependent on foreign aid, with Qatar topping the list of donors. The Gulf monarchy is estimated to have contributed over 1.5 billion over the past decade. Although the money has been dispersed, it seems that the public officials and poor families are not getting that money, and the economy has not been developed. And while the majority of citizens in their densely populated territory, which is a quarter the size of Greater London, languish in poverty, a select few live in marble-floored mansions and luxury hotels. And according to the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., 3 of Hamas's most senior leaders, Mousa Abu Marzouk and Khaled Mashal and Ismail Khaled, have net worths of more than $3 billion US dollars each. The embassy also claims that Hamas's annual turnover is $1 billion and suggests the group is only second to ISIS as the world's richest terrorist organization. So let's have a look at this excellent video produced by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. It's meant for social media, but I think you'll get the message.
Hamas has an annual turnover of $1 billion. This makes them the second richest terror organization in the world. So why is Gaza one of the worst places in the world to live? Case in point, instead of digging wells to provide clean water to their people, Hamas digs tunnels so their leaders turn a profit off of smuggled goods. The result? 12% of childhood deaths in Gaza are due to contaminated water. So, if they're not using all that money to take care of their citizens, where is it going? Into the pockets of Hamas leaders. And you know what the worst part is? Most of the leaders don't even live in Gaza. Free Palestine from Hamas.
And that's a great slogan. Free Gaza from Hamas. And anyone who cares about humanity, anyone who cares about the real state of world affairs would actually agree that Gaza needs to be free from Hamas. So we also have this excellent video that is produced by the Israeli Defense Force asking you, what would you do if you had $3 million US and what Hamas does with $3 million US dollars?
Billion.
אז מה אם נשים $3 מיליון?
מה הייתי עושה עם $3 מיליון?
What would I do with $3 million?
היו לי $3 מיליון. הייתי כנראה מקימה איזה בית ספר למוזיקה שמשלב ערבים ויהודים ביחד.
נקנה דירה על חוף הים, ברר אדומה, מספיק.
הייתי נותן לאנשים שלא היה להם כסף.
דירה לכל ילד, קודם כל. יש לנו 5 ילדים.
I fly to Africa and bring to help kids with their school, with their education.
נראה לי שהייתי לוקח שנה הפסקה ופשוט מטייל במלא מקומות שווים.
So the big question is, how much money has Hamas spent on its terror tunnels? If one tunnel cost $3 million US, how much does its entire network cost? We're probably even talking into the realms of billions of US dollars. And this is where it gets very disgusting. And this is why I think there's a discrepancy we're seeing taking place between the actual people of Gaza themselves and their rulers, which is Hamas. And so therefore, the more conflict there is with Israel, and the more rockets and missiles they fire into Israel, the more terrorist attacks that they commit against Israel, and then Israel responds, the more money that Hamas leaders make. And this is what's sickening, and I think also, Alistair, this is exactly what needs to be exposed.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, as I said earlier, it's estimated that there's 500 kilometers of tunnels under this strip of land. I mean, you know, we talk about Israel being a pinpoint on the globe, but the strip, Gaza Strip, is even a smaller area. As we saw in the figures, less than the size of our Greater London, or 1/3 of the size of Greater London. And yet, practically the whole of it is tunneled off. And instead of using that funds, as we saw in the first clip we just watched, for providing good facilities for their people, they've just used it as a potential attack against Israel. And this is why, you know, you talked earlier about how people see this, and even in our nation, even in our churches, they see and they speak about Gaza as being occupied by Israel, and it's an absolute lie. Israel pulled out. I was in Israel back in 2005, 2006, 2007 with various conferences and things we were doing at the time, and how much lamentation there was going on because people were being withdrawn out of that territory, which was under, at that time it was part of Israel, but it was Sharon, Prime Minister Sharon, who negotiated or agreed under pressure from the world, from United Nations.
It was disengagement, wasn't it? There was no negotiations. It was just like, we are pulling our 8,000 Jewish communities out of Gaza. We are going to dismantle 21 Jewish settlements in Gaza. We are going to give a greenhouse that is worth an estimated between, I think, 17 and 21 million US dollars of producing like tomatoes and fruit and vegetable was destroyed overnight by Hamas terrorists. And all those Jewish settlements that were built were completely destroyed. And yes, it showed that Israel wants peace, but in the end, what happened is that Hamas gained complete control of the Gaza Strip.
Exactly. I mean, they were giving them potential prosperity because the stuff worked. It was an income-generating business, and yet, as you say, Hamas came in and they literally destroyed it all. And instead of being a productive area which could potentially give labor and jobs to the people, they just cleared it out because it was part of Israel, part of the Jewish thing. So it does show how the Hamas, I mean, it's become my mantra, as we've just seen in that, is the enemy of Gaza isn't Israel. The enemy of Gaza is Hamas, and that's why this this horrendous battle is going on to try and clear even Gaza from that controlling spirit. It is a spiritual warfare. I know we see it on the ground level, but it's something that's in the spirit, and it needs to be cleared so that the people can start to build a hope for the future. I'm always reminded of Jeremiah 29 verse 11, which talks about Israel actually under captivity, but it's the same God, and his heart is always not to harm but to prosper and to give you a hope for the future. And even for a nation which is Islamic, the Lord would love for them to prosper and come to know him. So the potential is there for the nation, but it's being misused, abused, whatever you want to use the word, and being used to line pockets instead of benefiting the people.
So let's break down some of the facts regarding Hamas in Gaza, because they're important. So Hamas is best known for its military wing, even though you can't separate its military wing from its political wing, despite many Western governments wanting to do so. We reports that it has 40,000 terrorists who wear the Hamas badge, thousands of whom took part in the October 7 mass terrorist attack in Israel. They are armed to teeth with rifles, rockets and missiles, and has vowed to destroy Israel, shown in their covenant charter. The terrorist organization is the de facto authority that governs over Gaza, running organizations including their healthcare system, together with social services and the media, and also their education system. Israel pulled out 8,000 of the Jewish residents from 21 settlements in Gaza back in 2005, known as the Unilateral Disengagement Plan by a former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, that brought pain and misery upon Israel. Hamas won the parliamentary elections in 2006, and Ismail became its Prime Minister of Gaza under the Palestinian Authority until they carried out a coup against the PLO in 2007 and took full control and power of Gaza. And you can see video footage of literally Hamas members throwing members of Fatah or the PLO off the roofs of building as they carried out their coup against Fatah, which is the PLO. We see that it remains in control of the territory, and having called no election since, is essentially a totalitarian regime, imposing its radical Islamist ideology on its population. And in the years since taking control, the group's leaders have profited off the misery of the Gazan people. The Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C. Has accused the terrorist organization of using its funds to build tunnels, arming its fighters rather than building vital infrastructures such as wells and water treatment.
Yeah. Absolutely, what we've been seeing, and you know the other thing, if anyone's been watching news programs recently, which I'm sure most people are, and you see the amount of media attention going to the hospitals that are, yes, they are struggling and suffering, and there's this total denial of tunnel systems underneath the hospital and underneath most of Gaza, and that's why the reports come completely conflicting, because Israel, they've got their troops in there, they're trying to clear those tunnels, and they know where those tunnels are because they're in the land, and yet there's this denial coming from even our own media sources, which tend to be more pro-Palestinian in their reporting than they are pro-Israel. But the truth will come to the forefront. And you know, we're seeing the figures of the finances that are being used, the tunnels that are being built, and the terrorist acts that are going on out of that strip of land. It needs to turn around, and I mean, we as believers really know we need to be praying into protection for the IDF soldiers on the front line, but also protection for the civilians of Palestine, because we're hearing the stories, aren't we, that even when they're trying to get out of the area, because Israel always does warn, look, there's terrorists in this area, we're gonna be coming in, so please move yourselves out. And when they've been trying to get out, the Palestinian, the Hamas are there with guns saying, get back into your homes, knowing that they get the good reports for them when people are killed. And it's horrendous to see death and destruction that we're seeing on our screens. But something has to be done to rid the Gazian people of the Hamas control.
And of course, all the bloodshed, it's the Hamas leaders that are profiteering from this, and that they are to blame for the misery in Gaza, not Israel. So a study from 2021 suggested that 1/4 of the disease spread in the territory is caused by water pollution, and 12% of deaths of young children are due to infections related to contaminated water. While Gazans are deprived of basic needs, Hamas uses its aid and funds to line their own pockets, the embassy of Israel said on X, formerly known as Twitter. Israel has also said Hamas continues to attack the border without building civilian bomb shelters, knowing the Israeli military will retaliate. And instead, Hamas says its leadership hoards wealth, uses Palestinians as human shields, and allows the population it claims to govern to go hungry. I mean, this is what's so tragic. I mean, all it needs is for the people of Gaza, and they're beginning to do this now, to wake up to the reality that Hamas is not governing in their own interests of the people. Hamas is profiteering from their misery, and they are deliberately kept in misery and squalor in order that the Hamas leaders can become billionaires out of this conflict.
One of the major projects that I've been involved in from Vision for Israel, and you know about it, is providing bomb shelters in Israel, because we know the constant rocket attacks that come, and then they'll go silent for a while, but they come up again. So we're making sure that there are bomb shelters for children and families to get to. Why are they not doing the same? I mean, we would happily, if they were going to be funded to help in case of a bombing attack for people to be saved, I'm sure the world would come and be part of that. But at the end of the day, the main problem is to deal with the terrorist organization which is actually causing the attacks.
Yeah. Can I just take you one step back?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to make this point, Alistair. If Hamas were not firing rockets and missiles into Israel, if Hamas hadn't committed the worst act of genocide against the Jewish people in one single day that we haven't seen for 80 years, and that the last time we saw anything like that was the Holocaust, there wouldn't be any bombardment of Gaza. Gaza would be living in peace, Gaza would be prosperous, and the people of Gaza would be rich because they would be trading with Israel. They would become a big tourist destination. You'd have Egyptians, Israelis and others all coming to the beaches of Gaza, sitting out, eating from their food, staying in their hotels, and Gaza would be a rich country. Now, we do know that the leaders of Hamas have built shopping malls for themselves. They've built expensive villas for themselves in Gaza, and they're making huge amounts of money of a 20% tax on anything that's smuggled in from Egypt into the Gaza Strip.
It is such a frightening statistic, isn't it? And of course, these huge shopping malls and so on that are being set up, the normal people in Gaza can't even afford to go in them, and they're not even welcome in them because they're not the right sort of people. So it's only the supporters of Hamas that are getting any benefit from the money being invested, and it's invested for a specific purpose. So it's a very, very sad statistic, and the point you make is very, very true, because Israel is the Israel Defense Force. They don't look to go in and clear Gaza. Once having agreed under Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister at the time, to give the land to them, they are not occupying them. Everything they do is to defend their own people from every attack of rockets, missiles. It always starts out of Gaza to the civilian populations of Israel. They never go in thinking, okay, let's clear this lot out. They know that they have these rocket sites, but they leave them there knowing that, that's the way it's got to be. But they have to defend themselves. So the whole idea of fencing around, which they thought was an easier way of keeping their people safe, it's proved not to be so in the last month or so. But, it's a tough battle over there, and we need to. I mean,
also what's tragic as well is the fact that the Israelis have given working visas to the residents of Gaza to work in Israel, somewhere in the region of 13 to 17,000 people, knowing the security threat that posed to Israel. And of course, what happened then, that many of those who came to work in Israel were doing reconnaissance on behalf of Hamas, identifying where people lived, where the nearest kibbutz were, making this, giving essentially Hamas leaders an intelligence report on the surrounding villages, the kibbutzim and the towns while they were working on them, befriending the Israelis that were neighboring them, and then a few months later coming out and murdering 1,500 Israelis in the most horrific brutal, disgusting pogrom that we didn't even think was possible in the 21st century.
Exactly.
So it just shows you the goodwill and the intentions of the Israeli people, while Hamas leaders themselves are amassing billions. I mean, according to this one, according to the German news outlet Bild, there are 4 Hamas officials who have grown particularly wealthy over the years. The trio of Abu Marzouk, Khaled Mashal, and Ismail Khaled, as well as a 4th named Yunus Karfish. And what's interesting about Khaled Mashal, for example, is back in 2007, the Israelis carried out a Mossad attack on him and managed to kind of poison him. And then there was huge pressure on behalf of the Jordanian government upon Israel to provide the antidote. So they had to provide the antidote to actually then stop a diplomatic instance between Jordan and Israel. And of course, he survived and then went on to make billions and become one of the main leaders of Hamas. But we also see, for example, here that the Ismail Khalil is believed to be the richest of the 3, despite once vowing to live only on olive oil and za'atar spice. You can see him with a very white beard in that picture. See, the 61-year-old father of 13 children, Haniyeh, had been in hiding since 2019, living in the high luxury life in luxury hotels in both Qatar and Turkey. The German tabloid Bild reports that he often flies between Tehran, Istanbul and Moscow and Cairo in his private jet to meet leaders in friendly nations to Hamas. And his 2 sons, Maaz and Abdul Salam, are often seen in Instagram posts lounging on hotel beds in Istanbul or Doha. Maaz, who is very wealthy real estate mogul in his own right, is known on the Gaza Strip as the father of houses. Where he's in Turkey, he's often seen in the company of attractive women and alcohol, despite his so-called Islamic faith. So again, we're seeing nothing but absolute sheer hypocrisy on behalf of the leaders of Hamas, who claim that they are leading their people into revolution and resistance against Israel, when it's actually Hamas that are bringing the misery upon the people of Gaza.
The leaders are living the high life, aren't they? And I'm sure these pictures of the billionaire lifestyle is not seen by the everyday man in Gaza who is struggling to even put food on the table. I mean, we looked at a statistic earlier, wasn't it? But the high proportion of the people of Gaza are being fed not from the work of the hands. They're being fed by United Nations and the relief organizations. And that's a crazy situation for a land or a group of people who have been established, if that's the right word, for the best part of 20 years. They should be in a situation, especially when, as we talked about it earlier, they were given a piece of land which was already prospering, but they decided to destroy it. To see that a nation is still, or a group of the poorer people of the nation are dependent on the world governors, United Nations to feed them. It's mad. It's crazy. It needs to change. And I mean, this work by Bild in Germany and the Daily Mail is very important, but that the world starts to see, and the people who are actually supporting Hamas without even realizing it in other nations should begin to have their eyes opened by the truth.
No, exactly, and that's why we're recording this program today, Alistair. Yep. So let's have a look at some of the other leaders of Hamas that are worth billions. Right, so we're also seeing that Abdul Salam says, meanwhile, was disgraced after being found to be stipending off money in his role as sports ambassador for Hamas Surah Council. This is according to the German publication Bild. The publication estimates his net worth to be 2.5 million. While the Israeli embassy in the US suggested that it's around 3.2 billion. So sorry, that's 2.5 billion. And the Israeli embassy in Washington think that figure is 3.2 billion. Another publication, I-24 News, wrote last month that his wealth could be in the region of $5 billion US. Khaled Mashal, 67, the former head of Hamas political bureau. He fled to Damascus to escape the Arab Spring in Syria, and like Haniyeh, is now living in Qatar. From there, he handles real estate and financial transactions for Hamas. When he fled to Syria, Bild reports that he was said to have taken 1.5 billion from Hamas's headquarters in Damascus. and Israel's embassy in the US puts his net worth in the region of $4 billion US dollars. And then we have another Hamas leader, Mousa Abu Marzouk, who is 72, is another Hamas high flyer. He's considered the second in command within the terror organization and is effectively its foreign minister. After spending 14 years in the US, where he was in 1995 arrested for activities supporting terrorism and deported 2 years later, he moved to Jordan, then Syria, and then to Cairo in 2012. Despite his arrest, he keeps hold of the money, and today Bild reports his fortune is estimated to be in the worth of $2 billion. Yes, $2 billion US dollars, whilst the embassy in the US puts that as net worth of $3 billion US dollars. We see Yunus Katfish, 67, a fourth Hamas official, highlighted by Bild for his immense wealth. So saying he's one of the terror group's most important financial managers and has been on the US sanctions list since 2022 on account of being directly involved in directing Hamas's operations and holding key positions in several Hamas-controlled companies, including the Sudanese-based Gorat Holding and Turkey-based GYO. So the trend GIO is also on the US terror watch list, and in 2022 is reported to have a net profit of some 57.8 million Turkish lira, and that's around 2 million euros. So, you know, and they're saying that I-24 are reporting this is just the tip of the iceberg. So it really does show you that we see the mass demonstrations against Israel. We see a huge rise of anti-Semitism as the world says, look at what Israel's doing against Hamas in Gaza, calling for a ceasefire. And what we're trying to establish in this program is presenting the facts, presenting the evidence that here all that international aid money that's given to Gaza to benefit the people of Gaza has been stifled off by Hamas leaders, and they are billionaires. I mean, it just shows you that they are making billions and billions out of this conflict with Israel. So for them, it doesn't make any sense to de-escalate the conflict because they're making huge amounts of money out of it. And they are manipulating the Muslim communities around the world to give them money. But it seems that they're more interested in enriching themselves. And once they're rich, do you really think that these Hamas leaders who are in the safety of their homes in Doha and Qatar, or if they're in their homes in Turkey, want any part of this fighting? Are they standing with their fellow brothers fighting against Israel and Gaza? No, they're not even in Gaza because they love the wealthy lifestyle so much.
Exactly, and that's how it tends to be, doesn't it? They are, when you think of $3 billion times three people, that's, you know, $10 billion. How much could that be used to benefit people? You could still have a good lifestyle as a leader, but if you really cared for your people, you want to make sure that the standard of living goes up, even if it's 10% over what they have.
You could build hospitals.
Yeah.
You could build schools.
All the things that they are.
You could build employment business schemes. Yes. You could build hotels with this, restaurants with this, which then you could build shopping malls. And then you could literally, Gaza could be turned from the hellhole Gaza is, not because of Israel, but because of Hamas, into a Singapore of the Middle East, where the people of Gaza feel rich, they feel comfortable, where they have a decent standard of education, and where they have a good life. But instead, Hamas inflict misery upon their own people.
And the thing with Israel, Israel has a history of helping nations in Africa, in Asia, and so on, that are open to receiving the help. Because, you know, we know Israel is prospering hugely, financially, economically, but also technology-wise. So they can bring in the systems that help with agriculture, systems that help with investment of structured buildings, which would prosper the people long-term. It's not a short-term goal. They have a long-term goal. They would be the first people, as they are whenever there's an earthquake or a major incident, they're the first people to come in and build hospitals.
They have done. Well, they have done with Gaza. Like I was saying before, they've literally allowed anything between 13 and 17,000 residents of Gaza to come in Israel to work, to have a better standard of living, and then go back and enrich. There was even discussions before the horrific Saturday, the 7th of October terrorist attack of creating a business center at the Erez crossing. So an Israeli business and companies would relocate on the border between Israel and the Gaza Strip to employ the residents of Gaza to work there, where their salary would be almost 3, maybe even 5 times higher than those average salaries in the Gaza Strip. But instead, Hamas are not interested in this. They're not interested in the welfare of their own people. They want to exploit their own people for their evil terrorist agenda. But more importantly, they also want to end poverty so that they can become rich at their people's expense.
And they can control those impoverished people. That's the other thing. As they get richer, they have stronger control, don't they? But you know, we're talking about these ones that are coming into Israel and receiving a good salary for the work they do, and some of them have been used actually to exploit and show the weak points of Israel in order for this attack to have taken a month or so ago. But how much better would it be to invest in the land so that you don't have to go outside? You can actually be employed within the Gaza area, you know, the strip, because of the investment coming in. If there was peace with your neighbor, and if there was, the world would invest, but so would Israel invest to help those people to live a better lifestyle. And, you know, the charter has to be changed, and it's still in the charter of Hamas, it's still in the Muslim charter, that they want to clear the land. I know there's this controversy that comes across from the so-called the peace protesters from the river to the sea. You know, Palestine should be free. That is actually talking about removing them completely. It's not talking about standing alongside and being...
That's genocide.
Absolutely, that is it. But a lot of the protesters in the streets think, no, they just want to live alongside you in peace. Well, they didn't show that, any intention of that in the recent attack. And you know, until that Hamas charter is changed and the heart is changed to be peaceable, they would see prosperity come upon them, because the Bible says, oh, bless those who bless you. If they start blessing Israel, they see a blessing coming back.
Yeah, we can only see that when Hamas is destroyed, and it's like the people of Gaza have to go through a process of de-Hamasification. Like Germany went through a process of well, not so much Austria, but certainly Germany, a process of denazification, whereby Nazi leaders were stripped from their position. They faced justice. The population then realized that by supporting this evil, vile ideology, it brought nothing but misery and ruin upon them. Now, I'm just going to read out a few other of Hamas's business interests. So the online outlets suggest that hundreds of Hamas leaders are sitting on millions thanks to the taxation of goods brought into the territories through international donors, mainly from Qatar. While some estimates of Hamas wealth are more conservative, there's no question the group leaders have amassed huge fortunes. In May of 2022, the US Treasury Department sanctioned a Hamas financial official as well as other financial facilitators. It said Hamas Investment Office, whose leadership oversees this network, held assets estimated to be in the region of $500 million US, including companies operating in Sudan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, and the United Arab Emirates. And according to documents obtained by the German paper Welt, the group has a finance empire, this is Hamas, outside of the Gaza Strip worth nearly $750 million US. That is 600 million pounds sterling. According to the Jewish News Syndicate, the Hamas leadership controls an investment portfolio estimated at close to $1 billion US, owns assets in Sudan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Egypt, and other places. And Hamas also imposed a 20% on goods smuggled from Egypt into the Gaza Strip through its tunnels. And reports also indicate that Hamas earns an estimated $450 million US annually from Gaza's black market trade, and Iran is believed to provide Hamas leaders with $100 billion US from its own expense account. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN news item where one brave and courageous US senator is saying we've got to stop the funding of Hamas, and that means dealing with the Iranian regime.
don't be fooled. This is not an Israel issue. This is an Iran problem.
Oklahoma Senator James Lankford tells CBN News that's why the U.S. must immediately enforce greater sanctions against Iran.
Literally, Israel is facing violence from 3 different sides, all being funded by or stirred up by the Iranian regime. So a couple of things are pretty basic for this. The Biden administration has reduced the enforcement of the sanctions on Iran on their oil sales. So their oil sales have skyrocketed, giving a lot more money to Iran so they can send it to Hezbollah, they can send it to Hamas. That has to stop. We've got to actually enforce the sanctions that are in place.
Lankford sees the war in Israel as part of a worldwide scenario that threatens U.S. national security. Combined with the growing threat of China and Russia's continued war with Ukraine, Lankford believes the U.S. helping its allies is necessary to keep America safe. The debate now is whether to couple both Israel and Ukraine in the request.
Well, if we're going to tie those two together now, but those two both need to be done. I know there's a lot of controversy on providing aid to Ukraine. Let me make it very clear. Ukraine is currently being attacked by Russia with funding from China and weapons from North Korea and Iran. So when you have Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia together, if the United States just yawns and walks away and says that's no big deal, we're literally turning a new world order over to Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia. That's a bad idea for the entire world.
The White House's $100 billion request does link the two.
Why is Joe Biden going on national television and selling people on a Ukrainian escalation when Joe Biden is talking about the terrible tragedy in Israel? Whatever your views, Sean, on Ukraine, it is a separate country and a separate problem. I think what the president did is completely disgraceful.
Strong bipartisan support still exists to help both countries.
I think it requires a worldwide approach rather than trying to take parts of it out. It's all connected. The Chinese and the Russians said they're now friends forever. Iranian drones are being used in Ukraine and against the Israelis.
There's resistance among some Republicans, including here in the Senate, about bundling things together. Is it possible to pass Ukraine aid if it's not tied to Israel?
I just think that's a mistake. I mean, I know there are some Republicans in the Senate and maybe more in the House that think Ukraine is somehow different. I view it as all interconnected.
Unless something changes, the Senate is the only chamber that can craft a funding package. That's because the House still needs a speaker, and without one, legislation can't get through Congress and to the president's desk. House Republican leaders see this as a major problem on the world stage.
I want a speaker in the chair so we can move forward and go. My issues, my Committee of War and Peace, it's too dangerous right now. The world's on fire.
And if our legislators, whether in our British Parliament, whether in the European Parliament, or whether in Congress in the United States, if more of our Western governments actually realized if they really want to help the people of Gaza, then they've got to stop the funding of Hamas, then we could see a massive difference and bring peace and stability to the Middle East. We've got about 8 minutes left of the program, Alistair, but I also think we need to run down exactly where as well other areas that Hamas are accumulating its wealth. Yes. So one account is that the terror organization Hamas is cut off from assistance from the likes of the United States and the European Union, probably Britain as well, that provides support to the PLO in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. We see historically Palestinian expats and private benefactors in the Middle East have provided much of the terror group's funding, in addition to some Islamic charities in the West. Israel has in the past also allowed Qatar to provide hundreds of millions of US dollars in assistance to authorities in Gaza, while other foreign aid comes through the Palestinian National Authority and the United Nations aid groups. Hamas is also being able to raise its own revenue, taxing goods that move through sophisticated networks of tunnels that avoid the Egyptian border crossing in the south, bringing in food, medicine, fuel and cash, and also arms. Egypt also allows the entry of some commercial goods, as in 2021, Hamas reportedly collected up to £12 million or $12 million per month raised in taxes on Egyptian goods imported from Gaza, according to the Council of Foreign Relations. Iran is one of Hamas's biggest donors, surprise, surprise. The country is a sworn enemy of Israel, contributes funds, weapons and military training to the terrorist organization, and provides some $100 million per year to Hamas, as well as Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Turkey has also been a big backer of Hamas and a critic of Israel. Though Ankara says it only supports the political wing of Hamas, it also been accused of funding Hamas's terrorist activities through aid diverted to the organization's military wing. And a senior PA official also alleged that tunnel smuggling markets transformed the income of 1,700 senior Hamas officials into millionaires, according to a report in a Saudi weekly publication. But it's also have to deal with the issue of Qatar. I mean, it was only last year, wasn't it, Alistair, that Qatar hosted the World Cup, and yet Qatar is allowing these Hamas leaders to live in absolute luxury in Doha, where they have a combined wealth of over 11 billion US dollars, and that's amongst 3 people. And more has to be done to stop Hamas using Qatar as a base. And we know, for example, that Qatar is part of CENTCOM. There's a huge military US base. Qatar is given a favored status by the United States, such as Israel has, so does South Korea and Taiwan. And it's time that the Americans say enough is enough. If you're going to continue to support terrorism, if you are going to continue to support Hamas against Israel, which is the only democracy in the Middle East, then we will downgrade your grading and we'll pull out our US military bases from Qatar.
I mean, do these nations actually not see what's going on? Because Qatar is very much being used even in the negotiations for the hostage releases at the moment. You know, they have quite a high status because of their relationship with, we call it Hamas or the PLO or whatever, Palestine anyway. And yet we can see that they are being used to harbor people who are actually...
Yeah, but why is that?
Well, I guess it suits both sides. It doesn't make sense, does it? It suits both sides.
It's because Qatar is the spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Hamas is an offshoot, is the Palestinian offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt that was set up by al-Banna in the 1920s. We see that President Erdogan is also a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, and so is Qatar. So therefore, they have formed their own kind of force within the Middle East. Before it was Egypt under President Mousa of Egypt, when the Muslim Brotherhood were in power until they got kicked out of power in 2013, 10 years ago. And so these are the strongholds of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East.
Yes, and you and I can see that, and a lot of people who sort of study what's going on in the Middle East understand that. But you wonder, why are the Western nations not seeing through the cloud or the mist or whatever you want to call it, and supporting them? Because I guess it's financially benefiting the nations themselves.
Look at the Shard. I mean, the Shard is owned by the Qataris. How much do the Kuwaitis actually, sorry, not the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, actually own in terms of real estate in London? How much capital do they earn in this country? Which means that we are in the West, let's say, financially vulnerable to kind of Western foreign money and assets coming into the country, which means we can't effectively deal properly with the financing of terrorism. And so we know that if you stop the financing of terrorism, you stop terrorism, because weapons, missiles, rockets, they all need money. And the amazing thing is, when President Trump was in power, the Iranian regime and Hezbollah were complaining and crying out to the Iranian regime that they were running out of money. That's how you defeat terrorism.
Exactly, and I mean, unfortunately, financial becomes a real blindfold for nations, because if they're getting the investment coming in, short-term thinking, they're quite happy that London is prospering because Qatar are investing into our structure. But long-term, it's going to harm us, because we're going to be depending on people who are not dependable. They have an agenda. So it's time for these nations to actually start. Hopefully what has happened in the last month or so has opened the eyes of leaders of our nations in the Western world as to who they really are dealing, who they're really befriending and the reasons for it. See that there is an agenda on the other side. They want to benefit from a friendship or an agenda or a friendship with the Western world.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to quickly roll off these figures. So Qatar is a country that provides Hamas between 120 million US dollars and 480 million US dollars per year, according to the October report by the Washington DC-based non-profit Studies of Foreign Policy. These funds benefit Hamas leaders directly through payroll and kickback schemes, and indirectly through social services and government operations that helps Hamas maintain political control over the Gaza Strip. And Qatar is Hamas, Hamas is Qatar. Igal Kamran, president of the Washington-based MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, said recently. Alistair, thank you so much for joining me on this week's Behind the Headlines as we've been exposing how Hamas is being financed, and I want to thank you for watching this program at home. So when we see all the mass protests and demonstrations around the world against Israel and in London on our streets, all the condemnation being blamed at Israel, we need to step back and say who is actually responsible for the plight of the Gazan people? Hamas. So therefore, who can we blame for the current situation that the residents of Gaza find in? We have to blame Hamas. And when we look at the billions that Hamas is making out of this conflict, who do we need to blame for the terrorism and the billionaires? Hamas. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.